With the release of Unreal Engine 5.5, Nanite landscapes with tessellation have become significantly more performant, so I figured this is the best time to introduce people to it. Now in this session, I'll guide you through setting up Nanite Displacement on landscapes in Unreal Engine 5.5. We'll explore the significant performance gain compared to versions 5.3 and 5.4. I'll also share essential tips to optimize your Nanite Displacement rendering for visual quality and control. We'll discuss what Nanite Displacement is and how tessellation impacts landscapes. Now, highlighting key considerations to keep in mind. I'll demonstrate a straightforward setup using, the textures, their occlusion, roughness, height information for a compelling landscape shader. Plus, we'll cover how height map resolution affects displacement quality. So, using, for example, let's say a high resolution height map in a small landscape will give you more resolution to play with. So let's just dive in and see what we can do. Now, what is Nanite? Nanite is Unreal Engine 5 virtual geometry system, allowing for incredible detail model with millions of polygons to be rendered in real time. Now, this technology handles level of detail automatically, ensuring high performance regardless of the complexity of the geometry. Nanite tessellation, on the other hand, refers to the process of dynamically subdividing the geometry of a mesh to create additional detail as needed. This is particularly useful for landscape displacement, where we alter the geometry of the landscape mesh to add extra detail and complexity such as bumps, ridges, or other surface features like rocks or things like that. Nanite tessellation ensures these details are rendered efficiently, providing high-quality visuals, and as of Unreal Engine 5.5, without a significant performance cost. In version 5.3, you had to edit engine files and add console commands to enable Nanite tessellation. Version 5.4 made the process similar to 5.5, but with a bit less intuitive design, let's say. Without enabling the INI file, if you have a landscape and you have a material, if you open it, you will notice that there is no displacement option in here for you to use. So you do need to edit the INI file in order to start getting that, and then to be able to actually use the options for displacement. For Unreal Engine 5.3, we would need to go into the config folder of our project, and then open the default engine. And then in here, right under the script rendering settings, you would need to press enter and add these two lines, and then save the default engine in INI file. Once the INI file is edited and complete and you restart the engine, you can then select your landscape and open your material again, and you'll notice that you now have the displacement slot. So what we're going to do very quickly is enable Nanite for Unreal Engine 5.3. I'm going to add a multiply node, take the result of this checker pattern in here, multiply it by 0.5 so the effect is not too gradual or too big, let's say, or maybe 0.05 more is gonna work better. I'm gonna plug into the displacement slot, and then I'm going to press apply. We go back to our level and nothing has changed, and that's because you need to actually enable Nanite and build data. Once you do that, the landscape will change and it will now use displacement for the checker pattern. Obviously, this is not a very good map to do this, but it does work and showcases how to do it for Unreal Engine 5.3. 5.5 has a much more straightforward approach than this. Also, you've got to ensure that the console command allow Nanite tessellation is set to 1, because if it's set to 0, it might not allow your tessellation to show up. But if you've already added in the INI file, this shouldn't really matter, but just as a rule of thumb, make sure that the console command is enabled as well for Unreal Engine 5.3. Well, enabling Nanite support in Unreal Engine 5.5 is pretty straightforward. In your material shader, simply check the box to enable Nanite tessellation, then you can adjust the magnitude and offset to your preference. Now you can play around with these settings if you'd like, but you can see already that we have the displacement slot in here. So I'm going to do the setup of multiplying this checkerboard by 0.05, putting this into the displacement slot and applying. Then I will go back into my landscape once this is finishing applying the material. Heading over to my material, right now I can still not see the displacement, and this is because we need to enable Nanite and build the data again. Once we build the data, which shouldn't take long for a plain landscape like this, there we have it. We have Nanite tessellation again, and this actually performs a lot better and looks better than Unreal Engine 5.3 or 5.4. The best textures to use for Nanite displacement would be found on Fab under Megascans. So you can always type in Quixel up here and then have a look at, something like Quixel meshes. So anything in here that you click will be able to allow you to access their account. And then over in here, you want to look for some type of assets that would be relevant to this. So for example, we can have a look for a rock, and we would like to look at a rock texture. So let's look at a rock cliff, maybe something like this, jagged rock. And we can actually download this to our project. So we can press the download button. But very important is that we need to make sure that we do get the displacement map from this. So once we click download, it will sort of like tell us what it's giving us. And what you're really looking for is getting the highest possible quality texture set. So for example, we could get this one, which is a 4K. You also have some additional types in here. I would recommend you getting this one and downloading it this way rather than bringing it over into your Unreal Engine project using the launcher, because in this way you are getting a zip file that contains all of the parts that you need. So I'm just going to add it over here and then bring it over into Unreal Engine. So I'm going to open it in my folder. I'm going to extract it. So 7-zip, extract to jagged rocks. Then I can go over into the folder, and I can have a look and see that I do have quite a few maps, including the displacement map, which is what I wanted to work with. So we do have a displacement, we have a normal, we have base color, AO, roughness as well. So I'm really mostly interested in these maps in particular, but that doesn't mean that you can't use the other ones as well. So in Unreal Engine, I can just bring those maps in, just make sure they have the content browser here. So just drag them in like that. Then the maps are going to be loaded, and that's one of them done. We can actually see the displacement over here, and we can see the displacement map itself. It's quite, well refined. This is going to work very well for our landscape. Setting this up is very, very easy. And also, if you want to just quickly test it, you can just drop it into this shader and put the RGB of this into the displacement slot. It doesn't necessarily have to be the RGB, by the way. I mean, if you go into here and you have a look, you can kind of tell what map contains it, which is the red channel. Well, it seems like all the channels contain some information, but you only would need the red channel in this particular case, so you don't really need to use the RGB if you don't want to. But once we added that in, we can press apply, and this should now already start displacing the landscape based on the texture that we just loaded. And if we go in here, you'll notice that we are getting a lot of artifacting, so that's fine. The reason why we're getting that is because we have too large of a displacement value, so we do want to tone that down, maybe using a multiplier. Generally, you want to plug in here a parameter so you can control it through a material instance rather than just a normal, just a flat number. Now you can see that we are getting the displacement that we wanted. It's not looking great yet, but we will set it up properly in a bit. So we can also look at the magnitude of this. Maybe that is a bit too high, so we can tone this down to 1 and press apply. And this should already help with toning down that level of displacement. Now the sunlight isn't really helping us here. We want to tone that down a little bit more just so we can see it, but we will make a better looking shader than this very quickly so that it doesn't look as repetitive and as bad. Obviously this will change a lot once we start adding the rest of the textures as well. Speaking of Nanite tessellation, my WorldForge project is now on Patreon. The beta version has just released, and it has all the bells and whistles for an auto material that would really take your scenes to the next level. This auto material is going to get constant updates, and I'm currently improving loads of other things. It supports water puddles, lava rivers, stylized features. It is able to blend 6 different materials. You're able to use Nanite tessellation. All the meshes added to it can perfectly blend with the Nanite environment. It has a winter map, a volcanic map, a stylized map. Honestly, it's like full pack of features, and the shader itself is very performant as well. It runs with all the new technology, let's say, that's found in Unreal Engine. It will also feature stamps, PCG, and foliage generating abilities in the near future. So check it out on Patreon if you'd like. I think for the price of a coffee, you effectively get access to it straight away. So quickly building up on the material that we've started, I'm going to now go into my material and bring the rest of the maps. So I do want my base color, I want a normal, and also the roughness for now. we're going to put a displacement down here, and I'm also going to plug in a parameter. I'm going to change this to Nanite, well, I'm going to call it displacement intensity. Again, we will be developing this particular bit in a bit, a bit more, so to speak. Now the roughness goes into the roughness channel, the base color into the base color here, and then we have the normal that can go into the normal value like that. We can now press apply, and our new material is in place. So once that loads up and applies, we can then explore the new sort of landscape with that. Okay, there we go. We now have the rock in place, and as you can see, it's already starting to take quite a nice shape. It is very repetitive at the minute, but that doesn't mean that you can't sort of like fix this. Now, we haven't yet used the material instance, so I am going to right click on the material and create a material instance. Then we can actually plug this into our landscape material slot like that. We can then double click the material instance, and I can drag it out in the world a little bit here, go back into our tab, and we can see in the global scalar parameter that we have displacement intensity. And if you tone that value down, you'll notice that now we have not a lot of displacement. When you get these sort of like shadow issues, by the way, all you really need to do is either play the level or change a little bit on the displacement to fix it. This is a known problem right now in Unreal Engine displacement, and I think they will fix this in upcoming releases. Okay, so I think that displacement value looks decent enough. We'll keep it at 0.04 for now with a magnitude of 1. But again, you can go in here and you can change the magnitude to 4 again. But just make sure that you are then playing around with that, a level of displacement intensity and making sure that it's really quite toned down. You might get some visual glitches, as you've noticed here, just by simply using a magnitude of 4, so you might want to keep that down. Now what I want to do is get another texture, and I'm going to get a dirt texture from a fab, so we can actually use this as a cliff texture and the dirt covering the ground, instead of just having this cliff everywhere. And we're going to use a slope-based mix on the landscape in order to achieve that effect quite quickly. I'm going to get this dirt texture from here, again from Quixel itself. I'm going to click on the download button, and again I'm going to get the I might get the 8K or the 4K. I'm just going to stick with the 4K. I don't really need an 8K version of this, so just going to click open here just to make sure that I've got it, and I can open it like that, and we can have a look and see we've got base color, bump displacement, things like that, right, that we can do very quickly. Again, I'm going to get the base color, the displacement, the normal, roughness, and particularly AO if we're going to use that in any particular fashion. I'm going to drop it over here, so just drop them into my content folder. If it would allow me. Oh, sorry, I think it's not allowing me because I haven't extracted the file, so I just need to do that very quick. So I now brought my other textures in here for the dirt itself. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that we still have refined our particular landscape a bit further, because right now I've added a third person character, and if I try to walk on it, you'll notice that the displacement of the nanite is pushing the landscape completely down, yet the collision of the landscape is up here. So we need to rectify this. And we're going to go back into our material in here, and we're going to set our magnitude to 1 and our center to 0. In this particular case, pressing apply and then going back and having a look again. If I press play, we'll notice that our character is now indeed sitting on top, but our displacement is extremely minimal, so we do need to bump that up maybe to a 0.1. And now if I press play again, our character is actually walking on the ground. Just bear in mind that your feet will indeed clip through this. Some other things that we can do here is we need to increase the texture coordinate. So we are going to go in here, use this node that we've created earlier, this texture coordinate in here, and we can actually multiply by a number. We're just going to create a scalar parameter here, and we're going to call it UV tile. It's a very basic sort of setup. So if you multiply by 1, the UV tile will stay as it is. We're just going to have to plug this in every one of these UVs over here, which is very important to get a nice sort of look. We press apply and go back into our landscape, which for some reason every time I press apply it does take a little bit of time for it to compile. we're going in here, and now we have UV tile to play with. So if I put this to 2, you can see that the tiles are getting even smaller. So we want to get to 0.5, maybe even 0.2 or something like that, so they're a lot larger. And this is going to help with selling the scene a bit more. Now, again, because the tiles are larger, so the displacement will now need to be rectified. So we can actually probably go to like a 0.2. Now, one very, very neat trick, and I know a friend of mine on Discord is going to be quite upset that I'm going to put it on here. But one massive tip for you guys is to actually use an S-curve node in here. So you can take your displacement intensity, plug that in there like that, and you do want to actually control the power. So we're going to add another scalar parameter. I'm literally going to call it S-curve power for now. And we are going to make sure that this slider only works from 0 to 0.1. With a default value of 0.1, we're going to plug this into the power, and then it goes straight to the displacement. And this is going to fix a lot of our issues with sort of like magnitude and offset, or center, or whatever they call it in the material nowadays. So all the displacement will actually feed through this S-curve node instead of it being on its own and straight into the displacement slot. So once this particular shader finishes compiling, we'll be able to kind of see the effect of that. You will need to change the magnitude and the offset again after you do this change, because if we press play now, you'll notice our character is actually walking through the floor. So again, we need to look over here at the magnitude, reset all of this to default values just to see what that looks like. So again, we're going to press play, and you'll notice that our character is floating. So I'm just going to go over here in the S-curve, and now you can kind of like change these details a little bit, and you can see that it's kind of bringing the landscape up. So now it's still not good enough. We still need to bring it a bit further up. And again, this is still going to need to be a bit higher, maybe something like that. And now we, our displacement is pretty much done for, so we do need to kind of bring that up again. So pressing apply, yeah, this seems to now, the character is actually walking pretty much okay on the floor. So let me just now again play a little bit with the S-curve. Yeah, something like that. And again, you'll just have to refine this a bit further, but this is going to be the best way for you to kind of always keep the offset as you would like. And just get a more consistent result with Nanite displacement. Now, moving on, we need to effectively create the next step. By the way, very important to know, if you sculpt the landscape, so let's say we now add in here some height, this is going to cause a bit of a problem in the sense of the landscape Nanite tessellation is now disabled. So if, let's say, we're trying to create a bit of slopes over here like that, so if you check, Nanite tessellation has now been disabled, so you will have to go into your landscape and then rebuild data in order to get your tessellation back up and running. Otherwise, it just simply will not work. So you just need to wait for that to do it again, and then you will have your tessellation back in place. Okay, so that's how that works. So it's quite, I would say it's quite straightforward. You'll notice now that we have tessellation everywhere. What I want to do is I want to make the dirt show up on the floor and at the top, and then the cliff only to show up in here. So we're going to do that using a slope approach. So some modifications that I made already are just to add the texture coordinate for UV tile rocks and UV tile dirt. This is something very basic that we need to do. And now we have our nodes over here, and I want to change a few things up. Like, for example, I want to remove the multiply node and instead add a power node. And then I'm going to put the displacement intensity in the AXP point there, and then at the base we're going to feed our displacement. This is going to feed into the S-curve, so all of that stays like that. Now, we're not going to use a landscape layer method here. We're just going to use lerps for this, because I wanted to keep this particular tutorial simple and not dive into landscape layers. That's a whole different topic and a whole different operation on its own. So what we're going to do is we're going to add lerp nodes, and we're going to use 4 of these because we have 4 texture slots, 4 pairs, let's say, right? And then what we want to do, we want to put a cliff into the A slot and a dirt into the B slot. So for each one of these, you effectively take the nodes from each, the base color, and now we want to take the normal, and we do the same thing for the roughness, and we do the same thing for the displacement. And this allows us to now control where everything shows up based on a slope approach. And effectively this functions as a landscape layer as well, so it literally functions the same way. It just doesn't have a paint functionality. But with all of these done, we can now pretty much link them into like this, right? So they just simply go into their respected points on the node. So the displacement will go over into here. Now another one thing that I want to add in here is put an add node, connect the base to that, and then over into like this. And now I'm going to duplicate the displacement intensity and call it displacement offset. And this is going to help us. I'm going to put that to 0. This is going to help us to refine further the displacement of the nanite displacement itself. Now also I want to copy this particular bit from here. Sorry, let's just undo that. I don't know why it's applying the material. I didn't even press Control S. Anyway, I just want to copy this particular node and put it for every displacement. So for example, I'm going to take this, plug it in like that, and I'm going to call the displacement dirt, just so we know that this is the displacement for the dirt intensity. So that's going to help us to further refine our displacement values on the fly. So again, put this like that as well. And this goes into the A value. There we go. Now we're going to call this displacement rock, just so we know exactly that we have a difference there. We're going to keep those as settings. Now, we don't have an alpha for the lerps, because if we apply the material right now, they're just going to get quite a lot of mishmash in between, and the alpha was going to be a 0.5, so it's basically going to blend in between these two texture sets equally. So we're going to have the dirt and the rock pretty much lying on top of each other. So it's not necessarily going to be a pretty look if we go with the material as is right now. But once the settings are in place, we should be able to see what the effect of that is if we if we follow this thread. But what I do have is a solution for you guys, so that whenever you sculpt your environment, it dynamically changes based on the sculpt of the environment. So if we look at it right now, you can see that both the rock and the dirt are pretty much combined, right? And they're blending in, which is not exactly a good look. So what we want to do is go back into our material and create a slope mask material, and that's not very difficult to do. I've got my own sort of approach for it, but I'm going to show you guys what I want to do. So the first thing we want to do is break out float components, free components like that. Then we want to add the subtract, sorry, not a scalar. I want to add a subtract node. So subtract node over here, and then going to duplicate this one like so. I'm going to also add a divide node over here like that. I am also going to add a make float free, so we can actually put the nodes back together, and then we can bring in a slope mask at the end, and this is going to be our result that connects to all the alphas. Now we want to add 3 scalar parameters. So the first one is going to be the slope angle. Then we're going to duplicate this, and the next one will be slope fall off. And then we're going to duplicate this and going to call it slope cheap contrast. Okay, so all of these values will help us out. Now I'm going to give them some default values of 1 and 2 and 40 respectively. This cheap contrast goes into here, pretty straightforward. The fall off power goes into here, again, very straightforward. Oh, this should be a value of 2, like I said. Now this subtract node over here needs to go into the Y value, this needs to go into the X value, and then this B channel goes into the Z value like that. The slope angle will go into the B value over here, also into this float V3, and then it's also going to go over here. We have the G, the green value go into the A of the subtract node, and then the red channel goes into the A over here. Now, once that's done, we can put the result into this divide and divide it by a magic number of 42, and then putting this over into this slope angle. Now, with that done, we can actually just put this particular material, this sort of function that we created here, into these alphas. So hopefully this is not too chaotic looking, but I mean, I know it is, but you know, bear with me. Now we have our setup and we can apply it. And we now need to refine it based on the environment that we're working with. So once the shader compiles, we'll be able to do just that. We're going to go in here and you'll notice that it's already working. We have dirt over here and we have the cliff edges over like that. Now, bear in mind, if we go into sculpt mode, sorry, let me just go in sculpt mode. And now if I look at, sculpting, you'll notice how automatically this is generating the cliffs, right, as I go through. So that's exactly what we wanted. Now let's just bring back Nanite by rebuilding data. Otherwise, whatever we sculpt, that's going to happen. So just bear that in mind. Now we don't know if it's playable. So what I mean by this is if we press the play button, will our character feet sink in? And they are quite a lot. So this is the point where we now need to edit using the material instance. So you don't have to exit play mode to do this. Just open your material instance. I already have it open here. And now we can start playing around with these values that we created. So the first thing we want to do is enable slope, angle, and fall off, and we've obviously added the offset. So now we can actually play around with the offset. So if we bring the offset down quite a lot, you'll notice that our character is now walking onto the floor as it should. We are getting this visual glitch for shadows, but if you come out of play mode and then press play mode again, this will fix it. Now we are, we're not getting any displacement anymore. So this is the point where you have to look at our settings, right? The S curve, the displacement values. So this is going to be predominantly a sort of like a setup where you just kind of have to like play around with the values quite a lot, because I know we've offsetted this quite a bit, but it might not be the right approach in getting our displacement back. So you do want to then start playing around. So for example, the displacement intensity here could be set to 1, but then we might want to increase our displacement dirt and also our displacement rock to 0.1 to 1. And again, just bringing this offset a bit. Just make sure you don't do it too much, because you can see we can get some serious visual glitches as we do it. Now I'm going to bring the S curve up. Maybe something like that. And you'll notice that our feet of the character is now still sinking in, but we are getting the displacement where we wanted. So again, we want to have a look at, sorry, not the slopes. We want to have a look at, playing around with these settings a bit more. Maybe something like that will be enough. I just don't like the visual glitches, but unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get away from this. There we go. Now our character feet are properly, placed on the geometry of the landscape. And as we walk around, we're able to still see the displacement. Now the S curve can still be adjusted, so we can get a bit even more displacement. Something like that maybe. It depends on, again, your scene, your textures that you're going to use, what sort of displacement maps they have, and what the resolution of those displacement maps are. Now, also, very important, we have the slope effect. So, for example, if we play around with the cheap contrast in between the two layers, so I would recommend keeping that to a 1. But let's say we tone down the slope angle. So now you can see that the rock is taking over the entire landscape. So a value of 35 seems to give us a good sort of definition between the two. And then you have this fall off. So the rock can take over the cliff. Right now, obviously, this is a, if we go like that, it just sinks away the cliff. Now, this is a very basic landscape. We don't really have any shapes. And this is really the last topic that I want to touch upon, which is basically bringing in a height map to generate a landscape that's going to take advantage of this layering that we've done here, which again could be expanded upon, or you could use actual landscape layers to further enhance this. I think it's really cool what we've done, very, in a very sort of like short amount of time. And there's stuff like this where, for example, flattening this particular bit here, it just kind of shows you the power of this. You can kind of see there how we literally went from cliff to dirt in very, very sharply, and then rebuilding that landscape just gives us the effect back of Nanite displacement, which is looking quite good. Obviously, this is not as advanced as it can be, as opposed to, for example, the Whirl Forge, which is my auto material that I've created. So the final bit of the tutorial now is about using a height map. So I have one here where it says mountain slope, an 8K one. So we're going to actually use the detail of the 8K map to generate a 2K landscape. So the first thing we want to do is let's just delete the landscape that we currently have. And then we're going to go into landscape mode. And where it says here import file, we can actually click that button, right? And we can navigate to where I have my height map. So I'm just going to put this in here very quickly. Right, and these are height maps that we have, and we can actually use, what we said, the 8K slope. Automatically, Unreal Engine will see that it's an 8K, so it's going to try to use that resolution. But we don't have to do that. We can actually override it, and we can say, I want a 24 by 24 sort of resolution landscape instead of, an 8K. And then I can also even add the material in here. So we can, if we go over here, we have our material instance, and I can drop it in there like that. And that's it. I can just click the import button, and then the landscape will automatically load. Now, in many cases, like this one, we load up a landscape generated using a height map, and there is no real height. And this is where you go to the scale of the landscape, and you have all of these axes unlocked. So we can actually push the axis on the Z value up by, like 300, for example. So clearly we have to go higher than that. So let's go for 500. And now we're getting somewhere. We're getting a bit of height, right? Let's just try maybe 1,000, right? And this is our new sort of landscape based on that. Now we're not really seeing any of the blends that we were looking for. So I'm going to click the material and double click the material instance, and going to have a look to see what's our slope angle. Because if we keep on, if we decrease or increase this, let's say it's a 20, well, let's say it's a 30, but we want to look at the cheap contrast between the two layers. So for example, it could be something like maybe 50 or something, or 25, or I don't know, 10. 10 seems to be fine. And then we have this fall off as well, so we can add that in. Now you'll see that the cliff is now showing up in the dirt as well. Obviously, this is not a very rich environment in layers, but you can see the layering happening. And again, if we push this particular landscape even further in height, just so we can get massive amounts of height, now I think we're getting some serious sort of like lines of the rock in there happening based on elevation. We don't have any Nanite displacement as of yet enabled, but we do want to have a look maybe at the UVs. So maybe that's a bit too much. So let's just try maybe something like that, and then this one will be a 0.03, maybe something like that, just so it looks a little bit better. Okay, and now we can go and enable Nanite this, like this, and build the data for it. This will take a bit of time because it's, building a Nanite landscape mesh for 4 parts of the actual landscape. Now, this landscape is quite small in terms of size, even though we used an 8K map to generate it. Get a high resolution sort of a deformity of the landscape, but we only made a 2K size landscape. Now, this shouldn't stop you from creating from an 8K texture an 8K landscape or a 4K landscape or something like that, which is obviously going to be a lot larger. But this is to ensure that we have a more manageable sort of landscape size here, which I think works just fine. Now, once the Nanite landscape mesh finishes building, we will have our Nanite enabled. Again, you will probably have to play with the settings again to make sure that your character isn't, floating on the landscape or running through it. Because every landscape will be unique in its own right. So you have to make sure that your material instance is running based on that. So now we're just going to play with the character, and you can see, right, it's the character is walking through. The actual UV is just a bit too much. So maybe 0.1. Let's just go from 0.1, 0.3. So then we can have a look at the displacement. Intensity itself is just a little bit too much. So we're going to have to tone that down quite significantly. Finding the right settings is gonna, obviously it's gonna take a bit of time, that's for sure. One thing that I want to do is go into the material itself in here and make sure that our magnitude, we can set this up to like maybe a 0.2, because right now the magnitude is really not playing ball. So taking the magnitude down to 0.2 has effectively fixed all of our issues, as you can see. Okay, now I do still want to have bigger sort of layers, so maybe maybe something like that, 0.03. And as we approach the landscapes themselves, we can see that we were not getting a lot of height, so we definitely want to further play with that, make sure that we're getting a bit more height into our material. Maybe something like that, and take the displacement offset a bit like that. Okay, so now we're getting a bit more height onto the landscape. Let me just come out of the play mode and approach. Now I have played with a slope by mistake in here, so we will need to just increase the slope fall off so we can get our cliff back in as well. The displacement intensity on the cliff itself is not great, so I'm probably gonna have to add a bit more. Maybe, yeah. You just gotta find the right middle ground, maybe something like that. 1.5, yeah, there we go. That's quite neat, and it looks decent enough. Again, the texture might not be the best one that we're using here, and I might have sunk a bit too much into the displacement, but seeing this from further away is probably gonna make a lot more sense than seeing it from up close. So yeah, definitely 1.5 is too high, but you could always tone it down to maybe like a 1, maybe a bit even lower, maybe something like that, 0.8. Okay, but we're now getting that displacement in place as well. And this is across a landscape using 2 layers. Imagine if you're using 4 or 5 layers, how cool this could look in terms of just putting this together. So yeah, that's pretty much how you do it. That's the basics of it and how Unreal Engine 5.5 handles it. I think performance wise is also a big improvement as opposed to 5.4 and 5.3. So I definitely recommend people giving this a shot. But I hope you guys found that useful. I hope you've learned a lot about Nanite tessellation and landscapes in general and how it functions. I think overall it's pretty decent way of getting started. And I think a lot of people will be quite glad that the 5.5 has come out and the performance has improved, because a lot of people were just not very sensitive to use Nanite tessellation because the performance was horrendous. And now I think it's almost ready for real time. It's not there yet completely, but getting very, very close. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and also join my Patreon if you want to have access to my World Forge project. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you to my patrons, and I'll see you in the next video, which is probably going to release next week. We'll see.